Welcome back. Your dreams were your. No, that's stupid. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are in Prep 9, the third of 5 preps in Unit 2. So we are just beyond the halfway point. We are going to be talking about outlining. Yay! Now, if you're like most people, you hear the word outlining and you do that Macaulay Culkin face slap thing. You remember that from Home Alone, hopefully. Hopefully my examples are still relevant for my students today. So I'm worried that these references are slowly fading away. But Home Alone is one of those timeless classics. Anyway, the point is that you shouldn't feel that way when you learn about outlining. And I want to try to help you view outlining as a really easy tool that really helps your audience understand not only where you're going, but also where you are. More importantly than that, believe it or not, even though the audience is very important, it helps you hold yourself accountable to make sure you are being clear. All right, so before we get started, one thing is obviously if you have not filled the Google Doc before coming out to class and before coming to class with your speech topic, you obviously can't get credit for it, but you should still do this prep either way. But the point is that if you don't have your topic broken down yet, hopefully this helps you a little bit, but make sure you do this before class. And it's just a way for me to hold you accountable and make sure that you don't wait till the last minute. All right, so let's look at the big picture. Y'all remember speech 1? It wasn't that long ago. Remember how I gave you this beautiful upside down triangle and I told you the takeaway is really like the most general or generic part of your speech, and the main point digs a little bit deeper into the takeaway, and we talk about whether or not this general idea as you interpret it is true or false in one area of life, and then the sources, they really back that main point up. So you can go up or down, but either way it's organized, it makes sense, it gives your audience kind of a clear pattern to follow and say, okay, right, I understand this proverb or quote, I see how you're interpreting it. Oh, you're saying this is true in the area of sports. Okay, cool. So then all your sources kind of back that up. Well, in this speech, it's a little bit different. Instead of having one main point, you have 2 main points, and on each main point, you have 2 separate subpoints. So we're adding not only an extra main point, but we're also adding these things called subpoints. Now, the key to keep in mind is that your subpoints are really just answering the question in your main point. So if main point A is why this is important, then you're essentially answering that in your subpoints. You're saying here are 2 reasons why this is important. And if main point B, which it will be, some kind of how do we use this information, then here are 2 different ways that you can use this information. So the goal is to really think about this speech as just adding on to the last speech. Now that we understand the idea of the takeaway and the main point, we're going to kind of change them up a little bit and kind of move into a more difficult, more challenging speech. Now you have 2 main points and you have 2 subpoints and you have a couple more sources that you have to find. But either way, you want to follow the same principle. So your takeaway should be the most broad part. And in this specific speech, as you'll find out, it's going to preview the 2 main points. And then each main point is going to preview your subpoints. So we're taking our listeners through a very logical organization. Now some of you are going to be like, Adam, this is way too formal and this seems like I'm thinking my audience is a bunch of idiots. No, they're not idiots, and that's not what you're thinking about them. But instead, you're just trying to provide a map for them so we know where we are, where we've been, and of course, where we're going. And so you want to make sure you create a clear path for them. And hopefully, after you listen to this prep, you'll agree and say, okay, this kind of makes sense. All right, so let's start with question 1. There are 3 very important rules about outlining in general. Number 1, most important, everything has to be written in a complete sentence. That is what we call a declarative statement. So just like your main point, it had to be one complete sentence. It has to declare something. So obviously you cannot ask any questions. If you have questions about that, please let me know. Number 2, the sources really support your subpoints. Therefore, we're still using the iced method of icing the sources, and they are going to go under your subpoint headings. So you want to make sure that they are not a part of your subpoint headings. The examples in your course pack show this really good. So make sure you understand the sources actually go under your subpoints. Just as the sources went under your main point in the last speech, these go under the subpoints. All right, last but not least, the funny thing about outlining is there's really this is not writing a novel. This isn't about creating suspense. This is not about really clever writing. It's really about just helping your audience follow along with you. And so you want to make sure that takeaway previews the main points and the main points preview the subpoints. And then finally, the sources do support the subpoints. Okay? Why is that? Because as much fun as it is to ask your audience questions and keep them surprised, I really want you to think about being logical and linear, and also clear as a result. And so there should be no surprises. We should know exactly where you're going. In fact, we should be able to predict when you give us the takeaway exactly what your speech is going to be about, or rather what your 2 main points will be about. All right, so let's move on to a practical example to showcase this using mindsets. You know, I love talking about mindsets, and part of the reason why I love talking about mindsets is because it's been a really important part of my life. For most of my life, I thought I was stupid. I had a 2.85 in high school. I got a 17 on my ACT. I think I've told you all this before, but I honestly can't remember. And so when I read this book about mindsets, I realized that intelligence is not a fixed trait, but it's actually like a muscle and we can grow it. And so I try to kind of unofficially share this in my classes to let students who maybe feel like me feel better about themselves and encourage them to work harder. All right, so let's look at the takeaway. If I were giving a speech to educators and they knew what mindsets were, I would give a speech that had something to do with how directly, how mindsets directly affect students' response in their class, and simple intervention strategies that can greatly improve their success. So guess what? Main point A is there and main point B is there. Do you see what I did there? It's very clear this is a why and a how speech, and more importantly, in the takeaway, I have summed up my 2 main points. So let's take a look at main point A. Would you be surprised to know that main point A is about the effects of a fixed mindset? The first effect of a fixed mindset is low effort syndrome, or rather students putting forth low effort. And another effect of a fixed mindset is students actually cheating when they're challenged. So again, we're talking to faculty about their students, or we're talking to teachers about their students. And so we want to talk about why it's important to teachers. Well, teachers get really frustrated when students either cheat or put forth low effort in their classes. And so I'm telling them why this is important to them. So guess what subpoint 1 is going to be about? Ta-da! Low effort syndrome. No surprise there. And subpoint 2 is going to be about, ta-da, cheating. Again, no surprises, right? Everything previews everything else. Now, if I was talking about low effort syndrome, one of my first sources would be from Carol Dweck, talking about how students, when they feel challenged, or when they feel like their intelligence is challenged, they actually kind of tune out and they actually stop trying because they feel like, hey, I'm smart. This should come easy to me. Now, in some cases, students with a fixed mindset actually want to keep that persona of being smart. So in the second subpoint, I'm going to talk about sources that talk about particularly a study that was done by Carol Dweck that actually showcased how students with a fixed mindset, in order to keep that persona of being smart, actually cheated because they did not want to put forth the effort, nor did they want to look like they were stupid. And so as a result, we have these 2 effects of having a fixed mindset. So you're probably thinking, okay, Adam, if I'm a teacher, I'm probably wondering, how the heck do you fix this? Well, guess what? You can view intelligence as a muscle, and you can provide growth-oriented feedback. Again, we're talking to teachers, so these are 2 things that teachers can do. And guess what? You shouldn't be surprised. This is the how, and subpoint 1 is going to be talking about how teaching students to view intelligence as a muscle is one way to help them change their mindset. And then number 2, the second subpoint is growth-oriented feedback. And the key here is that you want to make sure in your main point B, especially since for everyone it's going to be a how, you want to give us tips. Now, do you remember, think back to when we first talked about icing, and I gave you that article about the 7 different types of competencies that you need to be a successful employee, or the 7 skills that employers are looking for. Those are the kinds of articles you want to be looking for now, because you want to be honing in on these different tips and ways to apply the information, okay? And so this is where those tip articles, where they have these different tips, are going to be really, really, really beneficial. I hope that made sense. Again, if not, questions. All right, moving right along. Now let's look at the takeaway. All right, so I've kind of given you some tips on how to give the takeaway, so you shouldn't be surprised when I say that your takeaway previews your 2 main points. Okay, so make sure that you write it in a way that makes it clear to your audience not only what type of organization this is a why, how, is this a what, how, or a how, but also a little bit of information about your 2 main points. Number 2, as I just said, your audience should accurately predict your 2 main points based on your takeaway. So you're previewing them so that your audience can say, okay, know exactly what to expect. Again, we're kind of just helping our listeners walk through the speech. And then finally, as you know by now, and I said this in the last speech, your takeaway is not a question or even multiple sentences. It's one concise statement, okay? And the reason why? Well, it's simple. I want your audience to be able to hear it for the first time and not forget it. When you have multiple sentences or it drags on and it's not concise, it's really hard for your audience to understand what's going on. Make sense? All right, so one of the things that I am discussing in my dissertation, because I'm a PhD student, whether you know that or not, it's part of the reason why I'm so frazzled all the time, is I'm studying self-authorship, which is a student development theory. So if I were giving a speech on self-authorship, in particular it was a how, I would say in my takeaway, in order to develop self-authorship in students, you have to help them understand who they are and what they believe is true. So you see how that's one concise statement, and it previews the 2 main points. We're going to talk about understanding who they are and what they believe is true. So that's excellent. Now let's look at a bad example. Why don't students understand who they are? Well, students should know who they are, what they believe is true, but if they don't, that's okay. I can help you with that, because that's what my speech is about. Probably not a good example of a takeaway because it's in the question form, it's in multiple sentences, and frankly, it's way too conversational. So obviously, you can see a good example and a bad example. The good example is tight, concise, it previews the main points. The second example is way too conversational, it asks a question, and it's not one sentence. Now, this is going to sound a little bit recycled because we've kind of gone over this, but it's good repetition and it's good to write all this down so you can always go back to this so you don't lose easy points. Remember that each main point should always be a why, a how, or a what, not all the above or even two. So main point A can either be 2 subpoints on why this is important to the audience, 2 subpoints on what this is, or 2 subpoints on how to use it. However, you can't in main point A have a why subpoint and a how subpoint because that's confusing, right? You want to talk about either 2 reasons why this is important to your audience in main point A, or breaking down what this is in the 2 different subpoints in main point A, or how to use this in 2 different subpoints in main point A. And then in main point B, it's always going to be a how or basically 2 ways that you can use this. All right, so kind of talked about this a little bit, but each main point must be broken down into 2 related subpoints, right? So again, I just kind of touched on this in the last question. You want to make sure that it's logical. So if you tell me in main point A, there are 2 reasons why this is important, then I want to hear each of those reasons in your subpoints. If you don't label that accurately or you tell me something different in the subpoints, it's going to confuse me and then I'm going to tune out and go to my cell phone. Finally, again, just like your takeaway, guess what? Both the main points and subpoints have to be written as one declarative statement. Again, don't ask questions in the main point or the sub-questions. We are answering the questions. So let's look at a good example and a bad example. Again, we're talking about self-authorship. So main point A is about identity or how students understand who they are. Then 2 factors that influence their identity is intelligence and gender. And so guess what? Subpoint 1 and 2 should be talking about intelligence and gender. And look, they do. So thumbs up, ding, ding, ding. What do I win? I don't know. Hopefully no one's confused. Hopefully that's what I win. And so again, this is the key, right? We're just continually building down from the takeaways. So the takeaway is going to preview the main points are going to preview the subpoints, and the subpoints will have the sources. Do you remember how we did those identity wheels in week 1? Well, that was kind of the main reason why I'm trying to holistically develop you. All right, let's look at a bad example. Why do students not understand who they are and what they believe as truth? That's a question, and it's confusing. And so then what some students do is write an incomplete sentence. Like for subpoint 1, who you are. That is a incomplete statement, and we don't really know what you're arguing. And then in subpoint 2, you're asking a question. So this is obviously a bad example. Folks, I'm going to be completely honest with you. You're going to look at me right now, or you're going to look at this video, and you're going to be like, Adam, this is common sense. I know this, but so many of you are going to make this mistake, and I'm just trying to help you. The more clear you are, the more concise you are, the more you write in declarative statements, the more likely your audience is to follow you. So as you can see here, I pretty much have all the reasons why this is problematic. All right, so you're probably thinking, Adam, wait a second. I'm so confused. You're asking us questions, or you're telling us to ask questions for, the why, the how, the what. That is true. However, what you want to do in your main points is actually answer the question. So if in Prep 7 you wrote why something is important, then you answer that question in each of the main, or in main point A. If you're asking the question, what is this? Then you answer that question. Remember that fun activity we did where we talked about social media with those 3 different audiences, and I had you actually write down, okay, like what is social media, or why is social media important to you, yada, yada. Well, now you're answering those questions in each main point. So hopefully that is helpful for you. All right, so now it's your turn to show me what you learned. Your goal is to obviously follow all the rules from this prep and bring it to class ready to go. And the whole idea is if you can set up your format, now you're ready to go. And so you know exactly what your subpoints are, and now all you got to do is fill in the sources, and you are more than halfway there. And you don't have to be like Bon Jovi and live on a prayer. Now, if you have any questions or concerns about any of this, please let me know. Come with this completed, and also might be important to use a pencil because you might make mistakes. All right, y'all. Can't wait to see you. Peace.